Hi, I'm Pastor Theron. Welcome to Church Where You Are and Story Sermons, relating life's experiences to the Bible. I'd like to tell you a story. But first, I'd like to say a special word of thanks and welcome to some people to whom I will forever be grateful. People that I stayed with while we lived in New Orleans, while I was in seminary, and I would come into Lake Charles for National Guard. People would let us stay at their house. They would host us, staying overnight, multiple nights. They took care of everything, and I will always be appreciative to Tony and Faye, to Stacy and Amy, to people like Larry and Lindra, who let me stay with them while I was in CPE. That's another story for another day. And David and Teresa, and them especially, and that's the part of the story for today, is their very gracious kindness, accommodating nature to me and to my wife and child. And in those days, things were very difficult. So that's the story for today. I didn't understand it then. It was a tough time. I graduated from seminary in December of 2003. We could not even get an extension on the apartment we were living in, as some people were able to do in those days, because the building that we lived in, the Arkansas building, and the collection known as the States Apartments, a set of quadplexes and apartments that people lived in when they came to seminary, our building was scheduled for demolition in January. And so by the end of December, there was no time left. In fact, our electricity got cut off a week before it was supposed to be time, and we had to call and get it turned back on. We were the last people living in the building, and we had until January 3rd, and I was waiting for a church to call and looking for a job, and nothing was really happening. And so we packed up everything we owned and hit the road and drove to Idaho and stayed at my mother's house for about 4 months. Not quite 4 months. We got up there the middle of January, having left New Orleans the beginning of January, and drove up to Idaho, and we stayed until about the middle of April, and things in Louisiana were starting to unravel, and we needed to get home. And so we returned to Louisiana without much to go on. We didn't have a place lined up to stay. We didn't know what we were going to do. And some friends of ours from church said, well, why don't you come and stay at our house? You know, we didn't expect it to last very long, and they were being very gracious and generous. They had a 3-bedroom house, the two parents, David and Teresa, and their 4 kids. So what they did, they put all 4 kids in one room. My wife and I shared the back bedroom, and our son William slept on the sofa. And we didn't expect this to last long. After all, I was a veteran, and I now had a master's degree in theology, and that was just supposed to be the key to unlock all the doors that I needed. And it turned out that those were the 2 things that kept me from being employed in most places. I could not seem to find a job. I could not seem to catch a break. It was a tough time. I would go in for interviews, and the people would say, oh, no, you're overqualified. And I would say, okay, what does that mean? They would say, we can't pay you what you're worth. And I would say, well, then just pay me what you're going to pay me. And, oh, no, that wouldn't be fair to you. And what I found out later was that in a lot of cases, people with higher education have difficulty finding jobs because the potential employers know that eventually the job that the candidate is looking for will come around. And there's a sense of disloyalty, or they perceive that the employer perceives that person isn't going to stay around long. They're going to take that better paying job. And I just couldn't seem to find a job. I was looking. I would leave every day and go and hand out resumes and applications and fill out paperwork, and not much was done online in those days. This was 2004, and so it was still kind of new, and so you still went to the businesses. So every day I'd get up and put on some good clothes and go out and look for a job, and it was a tough time. At one point in time, I was working part-time for a pawn shop. It was what I could find, you know. But David and Teresa, in their gracious kindness, never asked for a thing. We we worked around the house. I would help them in the yard and in the shop and in the, the mechanics of the vehicles and all these types of things. And I would, we did what we could to help around the house, but they just never required anything of us. And it was, I will forever be grateful to them. Things were very difficult. It was not until October, yes, we wound up staying 6 months in this rather cramped, accommodating circumstances, but we wound up staying 6 months until in September of 2004, I went back to South Carolina, to Fort Jackson, for my second half of chaplain school, and finally made enough money to where we could go and rent our own place. We rented a small mobile home in a park that we could afford, and finally moved out of the Mushton's house. This was a difficult time, and I just didn't understand it. I just couldn't make sense of the idea that I am willing to work. People don't know my sense of loyalty. They don't understand the desperate situation that I find myself. They don't know my work ethic, and yet I'm struggling. What I didn't know was that God was setting me up for a breakthrough. God will very often use these very difficult circumstances. He will use your desperation to move you forward, because that's sometimes what it requires. Sometimes there's a lightning bolt experience, like when God told me to stay in the National Guard. That's a whole other story for another day. God spoke to me as if he was sitting in the passenger seat of the car. Sometimes we have a burning bush experience where God speaks directly to us, directly to our mind, directly to our heart, to our spirit, and says, I want you to do this. But very, very often it is just the steady daily grind, pushing forward, trying to make sense of your circumstances, and you hit a wall. And so you back up and you go again, and you hit the wall. And you're trying to go this way when in fact God is pushing you this way. And in our desperation, we keep hitting this wall and trying to move. And eventually we see that we're not going this way, we're going this way, because that's the way God intends us to go. I didn't know that God was going to use my desperate circumstances to propel me into the future in which I still find myself. 15 or 16 years later, I am still involved in chaplaincy and pastoring and ministry that I had no idea that I was going to be involved in so long ago. I didn't know. I was applying for churches. That's another story for another day. But God used that desperation. And in Romans chapter 8, we find the passage that supports this. Romans chapter 8 and verse 28, it says, "We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purposes." God uses all of these things. He uses the good things. He uses the happy times. He uses the positive and the successful. But even more so, I believe, God uses the difficult and the desperate and the hard times to push us forward and to set us up for a breakthrough that happens in such a way that we can look back and we can say, I understand it now, that he was working all of these things for good. We can look back and we can say it was good that I was afflicted. In the Army, we used to say that the best day in the field was the day we come out, because we could tell all the stories of the difficult times and the cold weather and the hard circumstances, but getting on the other side of that, we can look back and we can say, I see it now. I see how God was setting me up for a breakthrough. And so whatever your circumstances, wherever you find yourself in the midst of some desperate situations and circumstances, things just aren't working out for you, trust this passage. Trust that God is still working. It's not taking him by surprise. He hasn't forgotten you. He hasn't left you alone. He's just working out the details and working all things together for the good of you, because he does love you and you are called according to his purposes. And we will always be grateful for the work that he does in our lives. Thanks for watching.